Welcome. Thank you all for coming out. I want to say a few words. I do promise I will actually play my violin, but I am a college professor, so I have to talk too. This recital, the idea for it was born really at the start of the pandemic, when I realized that my life was, and the life of my community and my world was being turned upside down in ways that I'd never seen before. And I needed something to keep me grounded. And for me, playing the violin has always been that. It has been, it functions, I think, in a way psychologically, it's not too different from the way that meditation or yoga or qigong or other such practices affect the brain, I think. It has this, really being in the moment, playing music has this grounding effect. And so I made a commitment that I would practice every day, which is something I hadn't done since my last violin lesson at the Eastman School of Music 30-some years ago, right? So, so this was a commitment that I was going to make. And then I needed new music, and I started, something to challenge me. And I ordered some music in, and I played through them, and then I decided, I've never played Beethoven's Violin Romances. And Beethoven has got enough musical and technical meat to keep me working for a while. So I ordered them and I started working on them. And as I was looking at those romances, I was thinking, there are some other romances that I have played in the past. Hey, I could put together a whole little romances recital. And since a commitment to practice every day is easier to keep if there's a goal, I decided I would do a recital. And my original hope and vision was that it would be a kind of celebration of the end of the pandemic. And when it was scheduled, it was almost that. But now we have the Delta variant surging, vaccination stalling, and breakthrough cases among the vaccinated, and we're all wearing masks again. But still, I think it's good to go ahead with this recital. And I've actually added on to the end of it something that is not a romance. It's something I wrote that I'm going to say a few words about romances. What is a romance? But the piece at the end for solo violin is a memorial to my violin teacher, inspired in part also by Frederic Garcia Lorca's poem about death, Malagueña. Romances tend to be optimistic. And that piece that we're going to close with is not at all optimistic. So it is an exception to the program, but I included it because it means a lot to me, and I want to dedicate it to all those who have died over the last year from the pandemic. So in any event, what is a romance? Right? It's a program mainly of romances. There's something that meditation from Thais, had it been composed by itself, I think it would have been called a romance. When I looked into the question, what is a romance, I got a range of answers. The things that were recurring there's the formal side. A romance is a kind of catch-all name for a slow piece of music that is a substantive work for a soloist and an orchestra, or in our case, Krystal, and in one movement, right? Substantively, it is slow, major key, lyrically beautiful, and optimistic in its tone. One side I read said that a romance is in 3/4 time. One of the romances on tonight's program, or this afternoon's program, is in 3/4 time. The others are not, so that is not a good indicator. But I think that Beethoven's romances really check all the boxes of these things. I made the decision that I was going to play these pieces of music in the order in which they were composed. And that meant playing Beethoven's second romance in F major first, before the first romance. I don't know why he held off publishing the F major romance until years later. But it was the first one that he composed. And the story is, from what I read, that he wrote it not long after he had a heartbreaking breakup. And this was also in the period when he was starting to lose his hearing. So there are some who hear in this music a longing for something that is falling out of one's grasp. And when I was thinking about that, well, both of the romances of Beethoven are in what's called rondo form. What that means is that there is this theme that is introduced that keeps coming back after various sorts of musical explorations, right? So there's a theme that's introduced by the soloist. At least in both of Beethoven's romances, it's then repeated by the orchestra or Krystal. And then there's musical exploration, exploring ideas in that central melodic theme, and then a return to the theme, and more exploration, and then a return to so the theme, that central theme introduced at the beginning, keeps coming back. And one of the things I noticed is that in the second romance, it keeps coming back, at least in the violin, in exactly the same form it was initially introduced in, as if Beethoven was longing to return home. Maybe that's not true, but that's what I extracted from it. The second romance is also in rondo form, but when the melody comes back, it's always different. It's always, elaborated in different ways and not exactly the same. So anyway, we start with romance number 2. Beethoven's Romance in G was written a few years after the Romance in F, as I mentioned. And it's in rondo form as well. But the melody, as I mentioned before, keeps coming back in a new guise when it returns in the violin. You can listen for it. And by the way, there's a method to my madness here. One of the things I was most anxious about, I don't love playing double stops. That's where you play two notes at once. And they're a technical challenge because you have to be concerned about intonation, obviously, getting the two notes to mesh. And there's this danger of crunchiness and the bowing. And this romance opens with unaccompanied double stops on the violin, right? So and it was almost enough to make me go, maybe I'm not going to play this one, right? Right. So but I worked on these double stops passages, and when they come back, they get even more complicated, like finger tongue twisters. But the opening melody, see, I'm going to, as part of the narrative, play it for you when I'm not nervous, so that you'll know I can play it, and then there's no reason for me to be nervous when I actually perform it. So the opening melody is. Right, and then it goes on. But then when it comes back, it's in a more complicated. And then when it comes back the third time on the solo violin, it's in a higher octave, it's not double stops, and it's full of little flourishes. So each time it comes back in this one, it's different. Almost as if Beethoven has learned, and maybe I'm just making this up, that you can never really go home. That when you've gone on your little adventures and explorations, when you come back, you've changed. And so home has changed too. That's at least my theory. So the next piece on the program defies one of the defining features of a romance that when I was looking into it was repeated, that it was a standalone substantive piece of music. This is actually the second movement of Henry Wieniawski's second violin concerto. So it is not a standalone piece of music at all, but he labeled it the Romance. He actually labeled each of the movements, and don't ask me to tell you what the first and last movements were labeled, because I can't remember. I think Cigana was one of them. But he labeled this one the Romance. Now this would have been, he started writing this in the 1850s, and I think it was first performed in the 1860s. But I wonder if by this point, Romance had come to be associated more with the substantive qualities. It is in a major key, it is slow, it is lyrically beautiful, it is optimistic, I think, in its overall tone, and enough, become enough sort of associated with that kind of, or quality of music, that he felt comfortable labeling it the Romance. The next romance on the program is a romance by my countryman Johan Svensson, a Norwegian composer, a contemporary of Grieg, not as well known as Grieg, obviously. He was a violinist, and what he's best known for are two compositions for the violin, a violin concerto and this romance. And I think this romance is the thing he's most remembered for. And it ticks off all the boxes of the standard definition, including the 3/4 time, the only one. So the next thing on the program is not called a romance. It is called The Meditation, and it is from an opera by Jules Massenet, Thais. And it appears in the middle of the opera. I don't know all the details of the plot, but my basic sense of the gist of it is this, that this monk wants to save the soul of this courtesan, and he presents her with, why don't you, come away from this life of sin and debauchery with me, and she wrestles with it for a while and meditates on the offer and then decides to accept, right? And it's this optimistic decision, but of course it's an opera, so, he falls in love with her and she dies. But in this moment, in the story, it's a moment of optimism and hope, and it's lyrically beautiful, and so I think it sort of fits in. So anyway. So the last thing on the program is not a romance. It is something I composed in honor of my violin teacher, Bernie Mandelkern, when he passed away. And I was meditating on this poem by Federico Garcia Lorca about death going in and out of a tavern, and it was kind of this, it was labeled malagueño, so dance, right? But a dance of death, right? Is sort of what I was thinking about when I wrote it. And that is not optimistic. But we have this past year witnessed a kind of dance of death. And so I want to dedicate this to all those who have lost their lives to COVID over the last little over a year. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming out. It was a pleasure. So go out there, be safe and healthy.